They thought I was just another engineer hiding behind screens, someone who couldn't speak anything but bash commands. But while they gave me 10 minutes to pack my things, it took me exactly 5 minutes to take 3.4 million worth of clients with me, and the rest I left behind vulnerabilities they'll never be able to patch. My name is Diana Marks, and for 8 years, I was the invisible heartbeat of Nimbus Core Inc., a SaaS platform that handled billing and subscription management for mid to large enterprises. At 38, I'd earned the title of Principal DevOps Engineer, though titles meant little to me. What mattered were the systems I'd built, the pipelines that ran like clockwork, the cron jobs that never failed, and the uptime metrics that consistently hit 99.99%. I wasn't the type to show up at company town halls or participate in the endless Slack channels dedicated to virtual happy hours and team-building exercises, while others posted selfies from their standing desks and debated the merits of different mechanical keyboards. I was deep in the terminal, optimizing database queries, refactoring authentication workflows, and ensuring that our enterprise clients never experienced a millisecond of downtime. The company had grown from a scrappy startup to a legitimate player in the enterprise SaaS space, and I'd been there through it all. I'd survived 3 CEOs, 5 CTOs, and countless pivots. I'd migrated us from bare metal servers to cloud infrastructure, implemented zero downtime deployments, and built monitoring systems that could predict failures before they happened. I was the engineer other engineers called when they couldn't figure out why the system was behaving strangely. I was the one who knew where all the bodies were buried in our codebase. But everything changed when Ethan Rollins joined as our new CTO 6 months ago. Ethan was everything Silicon Valley loved in a tech executive Stanford MBA. Time at Google and Facebook on his resume. A wardrobe full of Patagonia vests, and a vocabulary stuffed with buzzwords like synergy, paradigm shift, and 10x engineering culture. He spoke fluently about agile methodologies and DevOps best practices, but couldn't tell you the difference between a load balancer and a reverse proxy if his stock options depended on it. From day one, Ethan made it clear he was here to transform our engineering culture. He held all-hands meetings where he talked about technical debt as if he'd discovered the concept, completely oblivious to the fact that I'd been systematically addressing it for years. He brought in consultants who charged $500 an hour to tell us we needed to embrace microservices and adopt a cloud-native mindset recommendations I'd made 3 years earlier and implemented quietly without fanfare. The real changes started subtly. First, it was the hiring freeze on senior positions, while simultaneously bringing in waves of junior developers fresh out of boot camps. These kids were enthusiastic, I'll give them that, but they didn't understand the complexity of our systems. They'd push code that worked in their local environment, but would crater under production load. They'd implement features without considering edge cases that our enterprise clients depended on. And every time something broke, guess who had to fix it at 3 a.m.? Then came what Ethan called the Cultural Alignment Initiative. Senior engineers who'd been with the company for years started disappearing, not fired. Technically, they were transitioned or found opportunities elsewhere, or decided to pursue other interests. But I knew better. I saw the pattern. Anyone who questioned Ethan's decisions, anyone who pointed out the flaws in his grand plans, anyone who had institutional knowledge that made them indispensable, they were systematically removed. Marcus, our back-end architect, who designed our entire payment processing system, was the first to go. Performance issues, they said, though his code had processed over 2 billion in transactions without a single error. Then Sarah, who managed our infrastructure team and knew every quirk of our Kubernetes clusters. Not a culture fit, according to HR. One by one, the people who actually understood how Nimbus Core worked were replaced by Ethan's hand-picked team of yes-men and bootcamp graduates who thought Docker was revolutionary technology. I watched it all happen, said nothing, and kept the systems running. That was my mistake. I thought being indispensable would protect me. I thought that as long as I kept our uptime above 99.9%, as long as our enterprise clients remained happy, as long as the money kept flowing, I'd be safe. I underestimated Ethan's ego and overestimated his intelligence. The first direct attack came during a technical review meeting. Ethan had called together his new engineering leads kids who'd been at the company less than 3 months to review our system architecture. I wasn't invited initially, but one of the junior developers, perhaps recognizing they were in over their heads, suggested I should be there. I sat in that conference room, watching Ethan point at architectural diagrams I'd created, explaining systems I'd built, getting fundamental details wrong while his team nodded along. When he started talking about modernizing our authentication system, a system that had never had a security breach and handled 50,000 concurrent users, I finally spoke up. The current system uses a token-based approach with refresh mechanisms that prevent session hijacking while maintaining performance, I said calmly. What specific improvements are you proposing? Ethan's face reddened slightly. He wasn't used to being questioned, especially not by someone who rarely spoke in meetings. It's about best practices. Diana, modern systems use JWT tokens with microservice authentication gateways. We already use JWTs, I replied. Have you reviewed the implementation? The room went quiet. One of the junior developers looked like they wanted to disappear into their chair. Ethan's jaw tightened. The implementation is legacy, he said, that last word dripping with disdain. We need to think about scalability. Our current system scales horizontally to handle 10x our current load. We tested it last quarter. The bottleneck is the database connection pool, not authentication. Well, Ethan said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone men like him perfected in business school. I appreciate your input, but we need to think bigger picture here. This isn't just about making things work, it's about making them elegant. Elegant. In 20 years of engineering, I'd learned that elegant was usually code for, I don't understand the current system, but my ego demands I change it. After that meeting, I knew my days were numbered. The signs were obvious. I was removed from key Slack channels, excluded from architecture meetings, and my code reviews started getting nitpicked by junior developers who couldn't have written a working bash script if Stack Overflow went down. I started preparing, not obviously I wasn't going to give them any ammunition, but I began documenting every system, every dependency, every critical process that only I understood. Not for them, for me. I updated my personal copies of deployment scripts, exported my bash history, and made note of every undocumented API endpoint our biggest clients relied on. More importantly, I started paying attention to our client contracts. As principal DevOps engineer, I'd been directly involved in negotiating SLAs with our enterprise clients. I'd signed technical addendums, promised specific uptime guarantees, and committed to response times that were built into our legal agreements. Many of these contracts had my name on them as the technical point of contact. It was a detail everyone had forgotten about everyone except me. Our three biggest clients, Meridian Financial, Apex Logistics, and Pinnacle Healthcare, accounted for 35% of our revenue. Together, they paid us $3.4 million annually. These weren't just clients. They were partners who'd grown with us, who'd weathered our early instabilities because I'd personally assured them we'd keep their systems running. I'd spent countless nights on calls with their CTOs, walking them through our infrastructure, building trust one deployment at a time. Over the years, I'd built something more valuable than code with these clients. I'd built relationships. Their technical teams had my direct line. When Meridian had a compliance audit, I was the one who provided the technical documentation. When Apex needed to scale for Black Friday, I handled the capacity planning. When Pinnacle integrated with a new EMR system, I wrote custom webhooks to ensure compatibility. I wasn't just their vendor's engineer, I was their trusted technical advisor. 2 weeks after the elegant code meeting, I got the calendar invite. Alignment discussion with HR scheduled for Friday at 4 p.m. They couldn't even be creative with their euphemisms. I spent Thursday night backing up everything I legally could. Personal scripts I'd written on my own time, documentation I'd created, contact information for clients I'd worked with. I wasn't stealing company property. I was preserving my own work and maintaining relationships I'd built over 8 years. Friday came with the predictability of a cron job. At 3:55 p.m., I saved my work, pushed my last commit a bug fix for a production issue that would have cost us thousands in SLA violations, and walked to the HR conference room. Waiting for me were Ethan, trying to look somber but unable to hide the satisfaction in his eyes, and Linda from HR, armed with a folder that undoubtedly contained my separation agreement. They'd even brought security Mike from the front desk, looking uncomfortable in his ill-fitting blazer. "Diana," Linda began, her voice dripping with fake empathy. "Thank you for joining us. We need to discuss some organizational changes." I sat down, said nothing, let them fill the silence. "As you know," Ethan jumped in, unable to resist the sound of his own voice, "we've been moving in a new technical direction. Your contributions have been significant, but we feel it's time for fresh perspectives." Fresh perspectives. Code for, "I need you gone so I can take credit for everything you built." Linda slid the folder across the table. "We're prepared to offer you a generous severance package, 2 weeks' pay, continuation of health benefits through the end of the month, and a positive reference." 2 weeks, 8 years of keeping their systems running, and they offered me 2 weeks. "Additionally," Linda continued, "we'll need you to return all company property immediately, laptop, access badges, any documentation. Security will escort you to your desk, and you'll have 10 minutes to collect your personal belongings." 10 minutes. After 8 years, 10 minutes to pack up my life. I looked at the separation agreement, standard stuff, genre disparagement, confidentiality, agreement not to solicit employees or clients. That last part made me almost smile. They had no idea that I wouldn't need to solicit anyone. When you're the only one who truly understands how something works, people come to you. "I'll need to review this with my attorney," I said calmly. Ethan's face showed irritation. "It's a standard agreement. Diana, everyone signs it." "Then you won't mind if I take my time to review it properly." I stood up. "I assume my 10 minutes starts now." Mike, the security guard, looked apologetic as he walked me to my desk. My former colleagues avoided eye contact, pretending to be absorbed in their screens. The junior developers who'd been so bold in their code reviews couldn't even look up from their keyboards. I packed methodically, personal coffee mug, a few books, the mechanical keyboard I'd bought with my own money. I left the company laptop on the desk, logged out but not shut down, let them figure out how to close my terminal sessions properly. As Mike walked me to the exit, I pulled out my personal phone and sent 3 text messages. "Hey John, looks like I'm finally taking that break we discussed. Let's catch up over coffee Monday. Sarah, remember that migration project you were worried about? Might want to expedite that timeline. Tom, free for lunch Tuesday. Have some thoughts on your infrastructure concerns." 3 messages, 3 CTOs, 3 companies that represented $3.4 million in annual revenue to Nimbus Core. Mike held the door open. "I'm sorry about this. Diana, for what it's worth, this place won't be the same without you." He had no idea how right he was. I walked to the coffee shop across the street, ordered a large cold brew, and opened my personal laptop. First, I reviewed the separation agreement carefully, as expected. It was focused on protecting the company from traditional threats poaching employees, stealing code, revealing trade secrets, but it had a crucial oversight. It didn't prevent me from working with existing clients in my personal capacity, especially if those relationships predated my employment or were maintained independently. See, that's the thing about lawyers who draft these agreements. They think like lawyers, not engineers. They protect against the obvious threats, but miss the infrastructure dependencies. They worry about stolen code, but ignore stolen trust. I spent the weekend planning, not scheming or plotting planning. There's a difference. Scheming implies deception. Planning implies preparation. And I'd been preparing for this moment longer than I'd realized. First, I incorporated Gray Wrench Labs, LLC, simple Delaware C Corp, single member, focused on technical consulting and infrastructure services. Cost me 503 hours of paperwork. While Nimbus Core's HR department was probably celebrating their clean termination, I was building the foundation of their replacement. Then I reviewed my notes on our 3 major clients' infrastructures. Meridian Financial's integration was particularly interesting. Their entire payment processing system relied on a series of custom webhooks I'd built that transformed data between their legacy COBOL systems and our modern APIs. The documentation for these webhooks existed in exactly one place: my personal notes. The company's documentation mentioned them, but didn't explain the transformation logic. Without that knowledge, any change to either system would break the integration. Apex Logistics was even more dependent. Their real-time tracking system pulled data from 17 different sources, normalized it through a complex series of scripts, and pushed it to our platform every 30 seconds. The scripts ran on a separate server that I'd configured, using cron jobs that required specific environment variables and dependencies. The official documentation said, data is synchronized via automated processes, but didn't mention the custom node scripts, the Redis cache that prevented duplicate entries, or the failover mechanisms that kicked in when any of their vendors' APIs went down. Pinnacle Healthcare's situation was the most complex. HIPAA compliance meant their integration had layers of encryption, audit trails, and access controls that went beyond our standard enterprise setup. I'd spent 6 months working with their compliance team to build a system that satisfied their auditors while maintaining performance. The configuration was so specific that changing a single environment variable could trigger compliance violations that would cost them millions in fines. But I wasn't going to sabotage anything. That's not who I am. I'm a builder, not a destroyer. I wasn't going to delete code or plant logic bombs or any of the vindictive fantasies Ethan probably imagined I'd attempt. No, I was going to do something much worse. I was going to let their own incompetence be their downfall. Monday morning, I met John Martinez, CTO of Meridian Financial, at a small cafe downtown. John was old school, been in tech since the mainframe days, understood the value of institutional knowledge. "Diana," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. "When I heard you'd left Nimbus Core, my first thought was, there goes our uptime." I smiled. "Your uptime doesn't have to suffer. John, the systems are solid." "The systems you built are solid," he corrected. "But who's going to maintain them, that new CTO? Ethan, I've met him. He speaks in PowerPoint." "They have a team," I said diplomatically. John snorted. "I've seen their team. Kids who think programming started with React. Diana, I'll be straight with you, we're already looking at alternatives. Not because we want to leave Nimbus Core, but because we can't afford downtime. Our payment processing alone handles 2 million transactions daily. 1 hour of downtime costs us more than our annual contract with them." I took a sip of my coffee, let him continue. "Here's the thing." John leaned forward. "Our contract with Nimbus Core has a technical addendum. You signed it as the technical guarantor. It specifies that any material change in technical leadership that could affect service quality gives us the right to exit with 30 days' notice." I remembered that clause. I'd insisted on it. Actually, back when Nimbus Core was trying to land Meridian as a client, it was meant to reassure them that we wouldn't bait and switch with junior resources. Funny how protective measures have a way of protecting in unexpected ways. "So what are you thinking?" I asked. "I'm thinking we need continuity. If you were to, say, offer consulting services to ensure our systems remain stable during a transition period, we'd be interested, very interested." "I did just start a consulting firm," I mentioned casually. John smiled. "What a coincidence. Send me a proposal. Keep it reasonable. I don't want to gouge Nimbus Core. I just want to protect Meridian." My meeting with Sarah Chen. No relation to anyone named Chen in my past. Just a coincidence from Apex Logistics went similarly. She was younger than John, more direct. "Our tracking system is held together by scripts you wrote," she said bluntly. "I had my team review them after you left. No one understands the data transformation logic. We tried to modify one script to add a new vendor, broke everything. Took us 6 hours to roll back." "The scripts are documented," I said. Because what we have is like having a recipe that lists ingredients but not proportions or cooking times." She was right. Of course, the documentation explained what the scripts did, but not how they did it. It was the difference between knowing a car moves and understanding how an engine works. "We need support," Sarah continued. "Either Nimbus Core figures it out fast, or we need alternatives. Our board won't tolerate downtime during peak season. What would it take to get you on retainer?" Tom Williams from Pinnacle Healthcare was the most concerned. "Healthcare IT doesn't tolerate disruption." "HIPAA compliance isn't a joke," he said over lunch Tuesday. "Your replacement, whoever that is, sent an email about modernizing our integration. Diana, if they change one thing without understanding the compliance implications, we're looking at federal audits." "Have you expressed these concerns to Nimbus Core?" I asked. "I've tried. That Ethan guy scheduled a call. Spent 30 minutes talking about cloud-native architectures and compliance as code. When I asked specific questions about our audit trail requirements, he said his team would circle back. That was a week ago." "What do you need?" I asked simply. I need someone who understands our integration to either maintain it or migrate us to something else safely, preferably someone who built it in the first place. By Wednesday, I had 3 signed letters of intent. Not contracts, those would come later. Just simple agreements that Grey Wrench Labs would provide technical consulting to ensure service continuity. The fees were reasonable. I wasn't trying to get rich, just making sure these companies were protected. Combined, the consulting fees would amount to about $400,000 annually. But that wasn't the real play. The real play came Thursday morning when all 3 CTOs sent formal notices to Nimbus Corps expressing concerns about service continuity following my departure. They cited specific technical dependencies, referenced the SLAs I'd signed, and invoked the material change clauses in their contracts. They didn't threaten to leave, they simply asked for detailed transition plans and technical documentation. I know this because Tom forwarded me Nimbus Corps' response, sent by Ethan himself. It was a masterpiece of corporate speak that said absolutely nothing. He assured them that technical leadership transitions were being handled with the utmost care, and that service quality would remain paramount. He promised detailed documentation would be forthcoming, and suggested alignment meetings to discuss their concerns. What he didn't do was provide any actual technical information, because he didn't have any. Friday morning, exactly 1 week after they'd given me 10 minutes to pack, the first domino fell. Meridian's payment processing started showing errors. Not failures, just errors. Duplicate transactions that their system caught, but that triggered compliance warnings. The problem was simple. One of the cron jobs that cleaned up session data had a dependency on a specific version of a Redis library. When the junior developers updated the library during modernization, they broke the cleanup script. Sessions persisted, IDs duplicated, and the payment system got confused. It was exactly the kind of problem I would have caught in testing. Hell, it was the kind of problem I would have prevented by reading the changelog before updating dependencies. But the new team didn't know to look for it, because they didn't understand how the pieces fit together. John called me directly. Diana, we're seeing duplicate transaction warnings. Nimbus Corps says they're investigating, but... It's probably the session cleanup, I said. Check if they updated Redis recently. How did you never mind? Can you fix it? I can't access their systems. John, I don't work there anymore. But you could prevent it from happening on a different system, a more stable system. Theoretically, yes. I'm sending you an RFP for migration services. Respond quickly. By Monday, Nimbus Corps was in crisis mode. The Redis issue had cascaded. Without proper session cleanup, the authentication system started bogging down. Response times increased. Apex's real-time tracking began showing delays, not huge ones, just enough to make their customers nervous. Pinnacle's compliance logs started showing anomalies that would definitely trigger questions during their next audit. I heard about it through the grapevine. Former colleagues who still had my number started reaching out. Hey Diana, quick question. Sorry to bother you, but do you remember, I know you don't work here anymore, but I helped where I could with general advice. I'm not vindictive. These were good engineers trapped in a bad situation, but I couldn't fix Nimbus Corps' problems without access to their systems, and I made that clear. Tuesday brought the inevitable. Ethan called me directly. Diana, we need to talk. We are talking, I said pleasantly. I mean in person. There are some transition issues we need to address. I'm quite busy with my new clients, I said, but I could spare an hour Thursday afternoon. I could hear him grinding his teeth through the phone. Fine. Our office? I think neutral ground would be better. The coffee shop across the street, 2 p.m. When Thursday came, Ethan looked like he'd aged a year in 2 weeks. The Patagonia vest was wrinkled, the confident smile replaced by tight lips and darting eyes. He came with Linda from HR and, surprisingly, the CEO, Marcus Webb. Diana, Marcus said, shaking my hand. Thank you for meeting with us. I'd always liked Marcus. He was a business guy who understood that the business depended on the technology working. We'd had a good relationship before Ethan arrived. Let me cut to the chase, Marcus continued. We're experiencing some technical challenges that seem related to your departure. Oh, I said innocently. Ethan jumped in. Nothing we can't handle. Just some documentation gaps. We were hoping you could provide some knowledge transfer. I provided extensive documentation during my employment, I said. Everything I was required to document was documented. Yes, but Ethan struggled. Some of the implementation details seem to be missing. Implementation often involves tacit knowledge built up over years, I said. I'm sure your team will develop that knowledge over time. Linda cleared her throat. We're prepared to offer you a consulting arrangement, short term, just to help with the transition. I smiled. I appreciate the offer, but I have contractual obligations to my current clients that would prevent me from taking on additional work. Marcus leaned forward. Your current clients that would be Meridian, Apex, and Pinnacle. Among others, I said vaguely. Diana, Marcus's voice took on an edge. Those are our clients. They're your clients for billing and subscription management, I agreed. My consulting work is entirely separate infrastructure optimization, compliance consulting, technical advisory, different services, different contracts. You're helping them leave us, Ethan accused. I'm helping them ensure service continuity, I corrected. What they do with their vendor relationships is their decision. Linda pulled out a copy of my separation agreement. You agreed not to solicit our clients. I haven't solicited anyone, I said calmly. They contacted me. There's a difference between solicitation and responding to incoming requests. This is clearly, Ethan started, but Marcus held up a hand. What would it take? Marcus asked directly. What would it take to ensure our clients remain satisfied with our service? I pretended to think about it. Well, the immediate issues could be resolved fairly quickly with the right knowledge. The session cleanup script needs to pin the Redis dependency to version 6.2.4. The webhook retry logic for Apex needs exponential backoff to prevent cascade failures. Pinnacle's compliance logs need to be rotated with specific retention policies that match their audit requirements. I watched Ethan frantically taking notes. But, I continued, those are just band-aids. The real issue is architectural knowledge. Your team needs to understand not just what the systems do, but why they're built the way they are. We understand that, Marcus said. That's why we need your help. My rate is $500 per hour, I said. Minimum commitment of 40 hours per week for 3 months. I'll need full access to all systems, final say on any infrastructure changes, and a direct reporting line to you, not Ethan. Ethan's face went red. That's extortion. That's market rate for specialized knowledge, I corrected. Of course, you could always figure it out yourselves. I'm sure your team of bootcamp graduates will eventually understand the nuances of enterprise-scale DevOps. Marcus and Ethan exchanged looks. Linda shuffled papers. We'll need to discuss this internally, Marcus said finally. Of course, I stood up. You have my number, but don't wait too long. Migrations, once started, are hard to stop. Friday. The news broke. Not publicly, these things never make TechCrunch, but in our small world of enterprise SaaS, word travels fast. Meridian Financial had issued an RFP for a new billing and subscription management platform. Apex Logistics was evaluating options. Pinnacle Healthcare had put their expansion plans on hold, pending vendor assessment. Combined, those 3 clients represented $3.4 million in annual recurring revenue for Nimbus Core, 35% of their business, potentially walking out the door. My phone rang. Marcus. Your terms are acceptable, he said without preamble. When can you start? Monday, I said. Send the contract to my lawyer. I spent the weekend organizing. Not celebrating, I don't believe in premature celebration, but I did allow myself a small smile when I calculated the numbers. $500 per hour. 40 hours per week. 12 weeks minimum. That's $240,000 for 3 months of work. Add in the consulting fees from the 3 clients who were staying with Nimbus Core, but wanted additional assurance, another $400,000 annually, plus the potential migration contracts if any of them did decide to leave, probably another $500,000 in project fees. But the money wasn't the point. The point was the lesson. Monday morning, I walked back into Nimbus Core